When somebody gets sent to prison, the main goal should be to rehabilitate them and help them return to the outside world. But the way private prisons operate directly contradicts and works against that goal. Private prisons are prisons that are owned by companies who create contracts with the U.S. government. In exchange for taking in and housing inmates, the U.S. government pays them for it. But this is not the only way that they make their money. They also put their inmates to work, paying them very low, if even any wage at all, for a full day's work just about every day. The ACLU found that about 70% of inmates say that they cannot afford things like soap, deodorant, or phone calls to their family because of how little they get paid for their work and how much the prison inflates their prices for basic necessities. So really, how big of an ethical issue are private prisons in our society?
Private prisons have a direct incentive to not rehabilitate and release their inmates. According to the Yale News, the private prison industry generates $7.4 billion a year. When the private prisons put their prisoners to work, they generate more money. But when they rehabilitate their prisoners, they are literally removing their workforce or money makers. So they let their inmates go back out in the world, and with no rehabilitation, they are very likely to reoffend, landing right back in jail, keeping the prison money machine moving. A study done by the Minnesota Department of Corrections found that people in prison and private prison are 13% more likely to be rearrested and 22% more likely to be reconvicted than people from non-private prisons. Instead of serving justice, private prisons prioritize their own gain, hurting everybody, including you, for their own personal gain.
Private prisons have their roots in exploitation and greed. The first private prisons in the U.S. emerged right after the end of slavery. And with the rise of Jim Crow and the Black Coats, the U.S. government would lease their prisoners to plantation owners. Prisoners were primarily black and were forced to work in the same fields that they were supposed to be freed from. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, quote, except as punishment for a crime. And that little exception was exploited heavily. Black people would be arrested and imprisoned for things like loitering and thrown right back to work. Even today, black people and Latino people make up a large amount of the prison population, including private prisons.
According to studies and research done by the Wisconsin School of Business and Yale, inmates in private prisons are held for 7% longer than non-private prison inmates. Under 63% more likely to get into inmate and guard altercations, 30% more likely to get into inmate altercations, and 15% more likely to receive infraction from prison guards. Private prisons generally have lower standards and less training for their staff in order to keep the labor cheap too. In turn, inexperienced guards are more likely to escalate situations and hand out infractions to assert authority, which also affects private inmates' parole, making them more likely to be denied. This keeps them in prison longer, which only generates more profit for them and hurts everybody else on the inside and outside. But what can be done? People must be made aware of the shady operations of private prisons and how it could have a direct impact on them personally. Even though private prisons have been abolished at the federal level, they still exist with the state and juvenile systems, as well as immigration detention centers. There has also been an attempt by the current administration to reintroduce private prisons on the federal level. Letting your Congress members and other politicians know about private prisons can help lead a crackdown on the business practices of private prisons and possibly slow their reintegration into the federal system. Through spreading awareness and contacting politicians, private prisons and their exploitation can be put to an end.